So I'm going to talk about the pilgrims mostly for my first three. Um, the first one I got from the lecture was the relationship that the pilgrims had with the Church of England. So they disagreed with a lot of what the Church of England was doing, how the Queen was going from Protestant to Catholic and back and forth and back and forth. They didn't like that, and so they left and they originally went to Holland, but there wasn't any land in Holland. So they went to America, and they also left because if they were to outwardly express their distaste of the Church of England, then people would view that as them saying that they were against the Queen, which they viewed as being traitorous. And that kind of reminded me of a statement that was said where, if you disagree with me, you disagree with science itself. So I mean, like, I'm not making any political statements. I'm just saying that those seem similar to me. So they went to Holland and they went to the Americas, and they didn't just go for religious reasons. They were also ambitious, and a lot of people don't really talk about that a whole lot. They talk about mostly like, oh, they went because they were being persecuted. They also went because they wanted the land, and they wanted to get rich. I mean, not like rich as in like Cortez, like that guy, but they wanted to they wanted to be able to take care of themselves, and they wanted to live comfortably. And then lastly, I noticed the government that they set up with, what was his name, the guy that William Bradford. So the guy that ended up being the governor of this little colony that they made for like he was doing it for 35 years out of 40. Out of like 35 years out of 40, and he only wasn't those 5 years because he decided not to, which is kind of funny. So the government that they set up was honestly really similar to the government that was set up in England, except for the religious element. And so we see a lot of, they were Christian people who had a government. It wasn't a Christian government. And we see that consistently in the writings of, in the writings of Thomas Jefferson and of John Adams. And then also from the textbook, one thing that really got me was talking about the middle. And basically, there was the transatlantic slave trade, and the middle was a 1 to 6 month boat ride in the middle of a slave's journey from wherever they happen to be to wherever they happen to be going. So from Africa to North America or South America, and they were basically just put in a coffin essentially, but like there was a hole, so they were just a hole by their feet, so they were like this, and there was a box and there was a hole, and they were chained there, and that was rough. That's hard to read. Those kinds of stuff that happened in the middle. And secondly, there was talk about how the British would separate people, and how spouses would have to travel miles to see their spouse once a week, and sometimes the slave guy, their master, their owner would make sure that they weren't allowed to do that. And it says, I'm quoting from the book here, with the patriarchal and exploitative colonial environment, enslaved men and women struggled to establish families and communities. So if you ever wonder why the Africans didn't revolt during this time, this is why, because they weren't able to establish communities, and they weren't able to organize. So that's actually, I actually think that's really interesting. I mean, obviously it's a horrible thing to do, but I mean, like, that part of history and how they orchestrated that, whether it was intentional or not, I think is interesting. And then lastly, just from the third chapter, the colonial society, talking about the separation between the British culture and the emerging American culture. I would imagine this would have a lot to do with the Seven Years' War, where the British government made the colonies pay for the war in taxes, and they didn't make any of the English people in England pay any of those taxes. So that probably had a lot to do with it. But as they were going on, and as you know, the societies were merging, you started to see a different kind of American culture, and then separated from the English loyalists, so to speak. And so that was so that you can start to see the beginnings of the American Revolution start to materialize in the 1750s and the 1760s, before you even get to 1776. So I thought that was interesting as well.